All right, we're good to go, Chair.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, we'll call to order the July 19th, 2024 meeting of the Nevada Sentencing Commission. Good morning to everybody. Thank you all for making time to join us today. And welcome to those that may be viewing online through our portals or the YouTube channel, rather. This is the 9th meeting of our commission during the 23-25 meeting cycle. And Georgia, I'm going to ask you, Director Powers, I should say, I apologize. I'm going to ask you if you'd go ahead and take the roll, please.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. John Arascata. Michelle Bays. Here. Shara Bradley. Suzanne Crawford. Here. Christopher DeRico.
Here.
James Zarenda. Aaron Evans.
Present.
Evelyn Grosnick. Here. Chris Hicks.
Here.
Mark Jackson.
Here.
Troy Jordan.
Here.
Franklin Katchke. Jennifer Lanterman.
Present.
Joshua Martinez.
I'm here.
John McCormick.
Here.
Julia Murray.
Here.
John Ponder. Erica Suzuyamas.
Present.
Judge Beta Yeager. Assemblywoman Considine.
Present.
Assemblyman Hibbets.
Here.
Senator Scheibel.
Here.
Senator Krasner.
Here.
Vice Chair Brady.
Present.
Chair Herndon.
Present, thank you.
Thank you. We have a quorum.
Perfect. All right. And thank you. We're going to go ahead and move to agenda item 2 now, which is the first period of public comment during our meetings. There'll be 2 periods of public comment, the one we're about to enter now and then one at the end. Members of the public have 2 options for submitting public comment to the commission. First, they may do so in writing by emailing the commission at sentencingpolicy@ndsp.nv.gov. Public comment can be received in writing, or public comment that is received in writing will be provided to all of the commission members. So they'll have an opportunity to view that before the meeting, if it's received before the meeting or thereafter. Members of the public who wish to testify can also do so by telephone. Due to time constraints, public comment will be limited to 2 minutes. So please remember that. Any member of the public that exceeds that 2-minute limit may submit further comments in writing if you wish to the email address that I just stated. At this time, I'm going to ask staff to manage and direct anybody that's online that wishes to make public comment by telephone. So if I could turn it over to Mr. Sepúlveda.
Thank you, Chair. Members of the public who would like to testify by phone, press *9 and raise your hand. When it's your turn to speak, please slowly state and spell your first and last name. Caller with the last 3 digits, 948. Please slowly state and spell your first and last name for the record. You will have 2 minutes. Caller with the last 3 digits, 948. Please slowly state and spell your first and last name for the record. You may now begin.
Hello. My name is Jody Hocking, Jodihichocking. I'm the Executive Director of Return Strong. We're an organization that represents over 3,000 incarcerated members in Nevada and their families. Just a couple of quick statements. We would like to address the cost avoided statements and have some questions regarding those for future meetings. One is we have some questions regarding the data and some other perspectives that should be included in it. One is individuals who were released under AB 236 and their potential return to prison. We need data on those who received relief from AB 236, were released, and have since returned to prison due to violations, both with or without new charges. Despite reports of decreasing crime rates from Metro, NDOC is showing a rising prison population, which seems to be attributed to parole violations. We have been informed that approximately 3,500 people are back in prison due to such violations. But who are they? Were they released under AB 236? And how does their return impact the cost avoided? The other group that we would like data on are those not included in the AB 236 reforms. So we're talking about costs avoided for the people who were released, but what would have happened if people who were excluded from that relief had been included? This includes both AB 236 and upcoming legislation like SB 413. Research doesn't support the carve-outs that we're running in Nevada. So if we're going to look at data-driven decision-making, we believe that since there is national data that supports including all people in reforms, we hope to see additional data from our own experiences in Nevada to understand the impact on each carved out category at the state level, and then have meaningful data-driven discussions about why carve-outs exist, how they can be addressed, and whether they actually really make sense and in terms of public safety. There are a lot of ways this can be done, but the data and discussion are critical to finding answers and solutions. Finally, I would just like to reiterate our concern that I brought in May of 2024, that there's still no organization dedicated to representing the interests of incarcerated individuals on the Sentencing Commission. That lack of representation underscores why incarcerated people need a voice on this commission, and without direct representation, there continue to be silence. Thank you for your attention to those issues.
Thank you, Ms. Hawkins. Jose, do we have any other folks that wish to make public comment?
We have no more callers, Chair.
Perfect. All right, we will go ahead and close agenda item number 2. We're going to move on to agenda item 3. That is the approval of our minutes. Do any of the members of the commission, well, first off, I believe everybody was provided with copies of the minutes from our June 21st meeting. Hope so, at least. Do any of our members have any edits, comments, or concerns or corrections to those minutes? Not seeing any hands or hearing any comments. So I'll entertain a motion if someone would be so kind as to make one to approve the minutes.
Chair, this is John McCormick. I move we approve the minutes.
Thank you. Anybody second? I think Senator Scheibel raised her hand to second. Thank you. All right. So we have a motion. Any discussion on the motion? See no hands or hear no comments. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Raise your hand.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion passes. Thank you. So we will close agenda item number 3, and we're going to move on to agenda item number 4, which will be a report from our Director of the Department of Sentencing Policy. I'm going to turn the time over to Director Powers to provide any updates and information on our projected cost avoidance report. So, Director Powers.
Thank you, Chair. So everyone received the red line version in your packets of the projected cost avoided report. We did receive 11 proposed changes about which we will discuss and vote individually. We can do roll call votes for each of those. They are marked on the red line version. I will make changes as you make your decisions, and I will go ahead and turn it back over to the chair.
Okay. So first off, is there anybody that did not get a copy of the red line version of the cost avoided report? Do not see any hands or hear any comments. Okay. And I'm going to assume that everybody had a chance to go through that, and I accept Director Powers' idea, which is wonderful, to just work through each of the 11 proposals individually. So we're going to start with, it's on page 3 of the report under considerations, where we have the beginning of our 11 proposals. The first being a proposal by DA Jackson that makes changes to the information beginning. There are difficulties in calculating. Is there anybody that, or Mark, if you want to weigh in on that, since it's your proposal first?
Thank you, Chair. For the record, Mark Jackson, Douglas County District Attorney. The basis behind this proposal, and I think and especially the ones that will will follow. That way I don't have to repeat it. And I'm not going to repeat what I had stated during the last meeting. But some of this is based upon the testimony of Director Powers. One of the issues I'm struggling with, and I appreciate Assemblywoman Considine recognizing this, and I believe everyone is that we're doing this because of AB 236 that came out of the 2019 session. And part of that session, in AB 80, I believe, was the creation of the Department of Sentencing Policy and the Sentencing Commission. And what we're tasked with is making data-driven policy recommendations. And so as part of that, the legislature also tasked us with taking a projection that from 2017 that made it into the 2018 and was part of Assemblyman at the time, Assemblyman Yeager's and Chief Justice Hardisty's presentation as part of AB 236 about this $640 million cost savings. It was not only for not building a prison, but for the, and these are their words, not mine, ongoing personnel costs. So we, up until the recently, all of these years up until this year, all we've been doing is just taking a part of that $640 million and advancing it each year. And that's what I've had difficulty with. And so what I was trying to do is this part about considerations, looking at the lead into it, are thoughts that are offered regarding the cost avoided topic that may not be represented elsewhere. So I thought it was important, and this was just a start of it, but to the extent that we do have some data available to anybody that would read this report, I thought that would be important to add here. So on this one, I understand why Executive Director Powers used the word encumbered, does not designate encumbered or available. But the very definition of costs avoided from all of my research is it's talking about tangible or measurable funds, and that wasn't present from her testimony and acknowledgments at our last hearing. And so that's the basis of this first recommendation, changes to the first consideration in our packet.
Would it be easier, Mark, just to address all four of the first or the first four of them, since they're all your proposals and they're kind of interrelated?
Well, I don't know that one is actually they are all interrelated. 2, 3, and 4 are just numbers. That's data, that's statistics. I pulled those from the budget website from the state of Nevada, which is number 4 or 3, excuse me. The other ones are just simple calculations of what these increases or decreases are. I believe the 4th one does have a source reference as to where that data came from. And the reason I chose that one is that the introduction of AB 236, there were some changes that had occurred. Some of the most significant changes to our laws in the state of Nevada out of AB 236 were related to property crimes and drug crimes. And all of the data that's out there, we're not tracking the drug crime from what I was able to see. So there was only data really related to the property crime. And this is where the felony threshold was increased significantly and changes in the burglaries. And I think that it's reflective, and that was a significant increase. And that's why I chose to include that, because I think that does have a strong correlation to the effects of AB 236.
Okay. Anybody have any questions for DA Jackson, or just any comments they want to make? And we'll go ahead and group them together. I use the word interrelated, obviously, but I understand what you're saying, Mark.
Chair Herndon, I'm sorry, there's one other thing I did want to add.
Sure.
During the Advisory Commission on the Administration of Justice hearings leading up to this, in the 10 hours of presentations by CJI that went into the ACAJ's final report, which was the basis of the presentation by the proponents of AB 236. There was a discussion about what the costs were to house an inmate in NDOC. And at the time, the figure was approximately $25,000. It was $24,971 based upon those 2018 projections or numbers, actual data that's included in the second and third changes in our packet. Currently, based upon the current numbers, we haven't had a decrease. We've gone up. The 2024 numbers is it's $37,738 per inmate, which is a 51% increase in the cost of housing an inmate in the state of Nevada, and I think that is significant. And it's difficult to talk about costs avoided without talking about what real numbers are and what the cost truly is to the state. So I didn't include that as a bullet point, but you can take the numbers that are included in what I'm proposing be added to this, and you can calculate those.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, anybody have any questions or comments they want to make about the proposals that are kind of contained within 1, 2, 3, or 4?
Yes, this is Jennifer Lanchman for the record. I am a researcher and I like statistics. But statistics are not just statistics when they're used to imply a relationship that has not been empirically documented. And I have some concerns with a few of these points because I think that's what's happening here. And this is something that I brought up in our last commission meeting in June. So specifically with respect to point 3, regarding the relationship between the decrease in the Department of Corrections population and the increase in their budget. This seems to be taking a very general view that when the population decreases, that the budget should decrease. And that might be true, assuming everything that should have been going on in the Department of Corrections beforehand was going on. But that is not the case. And anybody who is familiar with the history of the Department of Corrections understands that that is the case. Anybody who understands how prisons operate, how they deteriorate, understands that's not the case. So typically when you have a Department of Corrections budget, high line, you've got line items for the cost of staffing, so their salaries and their benefits. You've got the cost of physical infrastructure, physical plant, and then you've got specifically cost specifically related to the people who are incarcerated in those facilities. So feeding them, clothing them, utilities associated with keeping them in facilities, any type of programming for them. Typically, inmate-specific costs are the smallest portion of any budget. Usually, the greatest part of any budget is your staff. You can't just decrease a budget if you've got contractual obligations with respect to what you have to pay your staff. Physical infrastructure for prisons is very costly relative to other same-size buildings because of the security needs in those facilities. And prisons must be routinely maintained and upgraded, or they become dangerous. They become dangerous for the people who work in them, and they become dangerous for the people who are confined in them. And if your conditions of confinement get too poor, then you find yourself in the territory of potentially violating the 8th Amendment, which nobody wants to be happening for a number of reasons, right? So you've got a lot of costs related to capital improvement in prisons that generally you cannot avoid if you want to keep your prisons compliant with constitutional requirements. Then the issue that we've talked about in a few meetings related to the aging prison population. The more your prison population ages, the more issues they're going to have that are going to include things like having to modify or retrofit your facilities for ADA compliance, They're going to have additional medical care costs, additional costs related to durable medical equipment, additional costs related to modified diets. So all those things are going to be additional costs. Beyond that, and this is not limited to Nevada, over the last several decades, we have observed an increase in the number of people coming into Department of Corrections custody who have a wide range of criminogenic needs, particularly behavioral health care needs, and those needs are more severe. And historically, the Department of Corrections has not had the resources to appropriately treat those conditions. So what you really require is a significant influx in funding necessary to treat those particular behavioral health care needs if you want to observe a decrease in recidivism. So I don't know that we can necessarily include a blanket statement here that is a problem that you have an increase in budget despite the fact that there's been a decrease in the population, particularly when there are so many things that really need to be addressed in the Department of Corrections in terms of physical infrastructure and the provision of programs. So we would, if we're going to discuss budget at all, we're really going to have to talk about line items here. So the size of the budget, but what parts of that budget are going to what particular thing in Department of Corrections. So that's the first thing. The second is point 4 with respect to societal costs. First, societal cost is actually a very vague term that needs to be defined. And here there is an adoption of a very narrow conception of what constitutes societal cost, specifically if you are the victim of property crime. This came up in our last meeting about violent crime, and we unpacked why that presentation was misleading. The same goes for this. So there might be a temporal correlation between the implementation of AB 236 and an increase in property crimes. That doesn't mean there's a causal relationship. The AB 236 is causing the increase in property crime. So we have to be really careful about how we present this. And the way this is written, it seems like this is a statement that is very easy to misinterpret as AB 236 being the cause of property crime increases. And we do not know that to be the case. So that's the first issue. It also does not take into consideration that there are reductions in other crimes, right? So there's been reduction in crime rate across other types of crime categories. So you can't cherry pick a piece of data that supports a particular position and advance that as the reason to do X, right? You have to look at those data in totality. And in totality, we do observe a decrease in a lot of types of crime and increases in certain others. So the way this point 4 is presented is like, oh, we have AB 236, and now we have an increase in property crimes, and there might be a causal relationship here. Or, sure, what you could also be observing is that you had a decrease in most types of violent crime, and you had an increase in property crime. You might have what we've talked about before, desistance, right? People are backing off the severity of crime. You have no idea what's going on here. And so we require additional data and additional analysis to really understand the changes in crime patterns that we are observing. And I have a lot of concerns with point 4 that's very misleading, could easily be taken out of context, and could be used to make inaccurate and potentially ineffective, inefficient, or disastrous legislative recommendations. So I think that we've really got to be careful here about, one, not stepping beyond the scope of our charge with respect to this report, but 2, not painting with a broad brush here and making statements that are methodologically or statistically misleading or inaccurate.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Lanterman. Anybody else have any comments on items 1 through 4 or proposals 1 through 4?
I'm not able to.
Oh, sorry.
I can't, I'm sorry, since the screen, hey, Georgia, can you take the shared screen off? Because I can't see if people are raising their hands or anything right now.
Oh.
Thank you. Okay, I think Senator Scheibel had her hand up.
Yes, thank you. I don't have the, excuse me, the raise hand button available on my Zoom this morning. But thank you for recognizing my actual hand. And Dr. Lanterman is actually much more prepared than I am today and said pretty much everything I wanted to say, but much more eloquently. And she has the data to back it up about the definitions of some of these words that are incredibly concerning. And I agree with her overall assessment that these line item changes are not appropriate for this report. And then the other two things that I wanted to point out is number one, I mean, I think that the first edit or the first line item is pretty obviously charged by using the word hypothetical and suggesting that the JFA, who spent hours and days and years of research to do the best calculations possible with projections into the future, had hypothetical numbers, really does a disservice to all of the hard work that so many people put into developing this plan, which ultimately became AB 236 and continues to be the process that we're going through. And the other thing that I wanted to mention is that one of the other reasons that we're seeing both a decrease in the population of the prison and an increase in their budget, like Dr. Lanterman said, is providing additional programming to them, providing better housing and better medical care. And also, the legislature has been working really hard to reduce the number of costs or the amount of costs that prisoners and their families are paying. So we have taken on the burden as the state that we are obligated to take on to pay for things like offenders' food, housing, what we used to call room and board. And so now that that money is no longer coming out of the pockets of the loved ones of people who are incarcerated, the state is picking up the tab. So we should be glad to see an increase in a per person budget. And then we can use a more nuanced approach to determine if that increase is somehow disproportionate to the increased services, the cost of inflation, the rising prison population, and other factors that cause the increase. We shouldn't assume that an increase in the per person cost is bad, or that it's attributable to AB 236. The data is just not there. And so I'm not going to approve any of these changes.
All right, anybody, thank you, Senator Scheibel. Anybody further? Assemblywoman Considine.
Thank you, Chair. I want to echo what was just said by the two previous speakers, Venetia Considine, Assembly District 18. I want to start with, I believe that the original Commissioner's draft statement of avoided costs provided the information that was requested under the law, under the bill. I added additional suggestions or considerations to this because I didn't want the ones that were the only ones to be the only ones to consider, because I am more inarticulate than our previous speakers about saying if we're looking at things, if we're going to look at a few things, we should look at everything, but only if we're going to crack this open. But the more I've thought about this and sending it in, if the requirements under AB 236 are such that the original draft met the requirements of AB 236, then all of these additional considerations and data requirements and things that I think are necessary to make further decisions, I think that should all go back to the legislature to amend the law to allow all of this to be considered in these reports. So I know that there's considerations on here that I requested to be on here, but they're on there to open up. If we're going to have considerations, they should be considerations across the board. And I am okay if they all fail. I am okay if the idea is to go back to the legislature and say these are things that should be left to the legislature to add to the report that we need in the future.
All right, thank you. Yeah, Captain Martinez.
I just wanted to speak to number 4 is, I mean, we're looking at data in regards to the impact of AB 236 in the crimes that were changed. When we speak from law enforcement side, you know, we know that there was changes that were made in regards to the charging of the particular crime. And we know that we see an increase there now with those numbers in regards to the state numbers of property crimes. And then we see an increase in retail theft, and we've tried to address that through the legislature as well. And we seem to be having successes with that here at Metro. And I know that was highlighted by our sheriff as well in the state of the department. But how do we track that, just from the academic person that spoke, is how do we try to narrow that down and try to get to a better data set where we know that we made changes to the law, and is it directly correlating to those numbers that we see in number 4? Because that's one thing we would like to see in law enforcement is, can we show an impact because of the change in law?
Yeah. So this is Jennifer Lanterman for the record. So first, number one, we need more data, which is highlighted in a lot of these points, and that's come up in many conversations over many meetings. Essentially, what we observe right now is, in 1 year, we have this level of property crime. This year, we have this level of property crime, like measurement by year, maybe breakdown by month, whatever, right? But we understand what is the total property crime by year. And we know AB 236 went into effect on a certain date, right? But what you're just seeing right now is a temporal correlation, right? There's a correlation in time between when a particular law was passed and a particular trend in a particular, with respect to a particular crime, rate, or this is generally a category, property crime. It's not disaggregated by crime type. So there could be a causal relationship, or it could be a completely spurious relationship. There could be other things going on. So what you have to do is essentially a time series analysis, or a multiple regression, where you are examining patterns, crime trend patterns of the same types of crimes, overall category property. You probably want to disaggregate by crime type, because I am willing to bet there's probably some variation there. And you start your interruption in the time series is implementation of AB 236. And then you're measuring all those crime points afterwards by year. And then you want to have a similar number of data points prior to the implementation of 236. You observe the trends over time. And then in a regression model, you probably might even use like a nested model of some type. You're going to include all sorts of other independent and control variables that we understand influence crime rates generally. And then if you want to focus on property crime, influence property crime specifically, right? Because it might not be that the issue is AB 236. It could be that there's some statistically significant change in the incidence of another variable or variables that we know directly influence the incidence of property crime, right? So right now, what we are observing is a temporal relationship between implementation of AB 236 and overall property crime. But it could be that that is caused by another variable or variables, and we don't understand that until we conduct additional analyses, which is why a lot of these conversations have revolved around the Department of Sentencing Policy needing additional data to be able to conduct those analyses so that we can determine what changes we are observing might or might not be attributable to AB 236. And then once we understand those relationships, we can make better evidence-informed recommendations to the legislature.
All right. Yes, DA Jackson.
Thank you. And I know we could probably all go back and forth. I just wanted to point out, with the current language, the considerations that it says in that the last sentence of the opening paragraph, following are thoughts offered regarding the costs avoided topic that may not be represented elsewhere. And I agree with every speaker that we need more data. So pointing out at least some of the data, I had offered up some of this, and it's not an exhaustive list whatsoever. The second number, those numbers are pulled from the table on page 2 of this projected amount of costs avoided report. What was missing from that is what that percentage decrease was. And that's what was added here, because it's not represented elsewhere. And it makes it easier for the reader to be able to see that what that decrease is. Going back again to what was presented to the legislature, both in the committees in the Assembly as well as in the Senate is that this costs avoided is not just the capital costs of adding an additional prison or more units at an existing prison, that it also, from Assemblyman Yeager's own testimony, the ongoing operation costs. So they've already considered that. We know that there's medical costs. We know that there's mental health costs. They projected this out for 10 years. And that was the argument then, which remains true now. And Executive Director Powers informed all of us that these were, in fact, projected costs. And it was based upon information that at the time we had started a slow, steady decrease in the prison population, but that projection had it as an increase, not as a decrease. So I think that these are additional factors that should be considered. And with respect to Professor Lanterman's comments about number 4, it's not it is the first sentence about the societal costs. It's not intended to try to define what societal costs are. And when we can probably bring that up later, that sentence says societal costs are not considered for projected costs avoided. And that was also a statement that we had heard from a previous hearing. This is only one example of, again, about the property crimes. That's one example, because this, again, was one of the 2 biggest parts of AB 236. What AB 236 did not do, because of there were some provisions in it initially that were pulled out that would have affected violent crimes, the habitual crimes, possession of firearms by ex-felon, use of a firearm. Those were actually pulled out, and it did not make the final draft. It did not was not enacted into law. So there wasn't a lot that would have affected the other 3 crime areas that are currently the crime data that we're currently tracking. What we are tracking is the property crimes. And again, it's not saying that you have to draw that correlation. It's just something for anyone that reads this report to consider, that we've had this significant increase in property crimes in the state with a significant decrease in our prison population. And I think it is appropriate. I would ask every member's support in that connection. Thank you.
Do we have anybody else? Thank you, Mark. Do we have anybody else that wants to comment about these? Don't see any other hands. So I'm going to go back to the
Chair, the Vice Chair.
Got it. I'm sorry, Vice Chair Brady.
Well, and if Troy Jordan wants, Troy Jordan as well, maybe if he wants to go before me.
I can go before you. You had your hand up first. It's up to you.
Thank you, Chair. Christine Jones Brady for the record. For number 1, I do appreciate how the report lists that there are difficulties in calculating avoided costs. So I think that part of the sentence right there kind of encapsulates everything, a lot of what we're talking about with data. And I'm wondering if we could have something like, there are difficulties in calculating avoided costs because there are multiple factors impacting the budget and something like that. I don't have it worked through, but that I do appreciate. I see what everyone's saying, or what a lot of people are saying, in terms of, if we're using words like encumbered versus hypothetical, sometimes those are words that need further clarification. Like somebody might be reading the report and say, what does that mean? A word like encumbered is a word that's a fiscal word, and people know what that means. So I sort of like how it is, but I do get the fact that there are a lot of factors that are impacting it. The second part of 1 where it says adopted by JFA in 2017, but on page 1 of this, I note that in May of 2024, it looked like we came up with a new formula. So I'm not sure that the formula we're using is the same formula that we began with, because we've had these over the last couple of years. We've had these kinds of tough conversations about what does it mean to avoid costs? Like we've talked a lot about that. So I'm not sure that that addition is accurate, or it may contradict with what we're saying on page 1. I do want to note that just agree with people, in terms of the medical costs, the staffing. We received several presentations from NDOC. One was a very good presentation that included the discussion on the aging population. So we have the aging population and the increased costs and other medical costs associated with that. Then we also had a great discussion at the last meeting of ours with victims and cost to victims. And I know that the prison is working to maximize the amount of funds earned by inmates that can go to the victims of crimes. And so that probably has a little bit of a domino effect with what Senator Scheibel mentioned in terms of, the prison taking on more costs so that they can be utilized in other ways. So I think that there's a lot of factors here that do pertain to the difficulties. And so if we keep nothing else, I'd like to keep that first part of there are difficulties in calculating. I would vote to keep that part. In terms of the correlation between property crimes and AB 236, I will say that a lot has happened in our society over the last few years with COVID. I'm not sure, and I know in previous meetings we've talked about the COVID effect on some of the incarcerations, like the level of incarceration. There was a COVID effect, and I know at one point we had a discussion, when can we expect to see the COVID effect dissipate? And I imagine that maybe, in the next few years, we've had the reduction. Some of that may have been the COVID effect and the consequences with people getting out because of COVID or people dying and different things. Not that many people died of COVID, but I'm just saying the COVID effect that we've discussed before, it may actually start increasing as that COVID effect dissipates. And we, for example, there's been this huge backlog in the courts because of the things that we, put off because of COVID or continued and that sort of thing. So there's a lot of domino effects here. The other thing I'll say about property crimes is I think it's interesting to connect it to AB 236. I had been connecting it, and I really would like to see more data. I'd been connecting some of those things to our economy. We have the increased housing, increased fuel, increased groceries. I would be interested to know if there was a correlation between some of the property crimes and the squeeze, the increase of homelessness, the increase of all of that, how we're, to the extent as a society or as a community, we are ineffectively dealing with housing, homelessness, to what extent are we causing a less safe community? So I don't know if some of that property crime has to do anything with AB 236 or the economy. So those were the comments I had, and I appreciate all of these additions in terms of this discussion we're having. And I agree with Assemblyman Considine. I would be open to something to the legislators saying that maybe we should look at more of these other things. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Jordan.
Thank you, Chair. For the record, Troy Jordan. I guess my perspective is I tend to be caught in the middle on some of this, and I agree with parts of what people are saying, but mostly I just wanted to reiterate, I think part of the reason we're doing what I would call these caveats or additions to the number itself is in large part what both DA Jackson and Dr. Lanterman both said, is that a statistic has to be put in context. And I think that the group has agreed that there are some significant caveats to this number. And working where I work, we put out economic reports every month. And they have to be accurate and they have to be in context. And I, for one, am very bothered by the fact that we're being told that this number is not in most ways accurate, or at least there's a lot of other factors going into it. And we really don't know what the truth is. And legislators use this number. Politicians use this number. Committees use this number. And I think what, at the end of the day, Mr. Jackson's trying to do with these and what Assemblywoman Considine is trying to do with hers is to make sure that the legislature does have that context, because I agree we should be looking at inflation and medical costs and things like that. But I also agree that to say that I disagree with Dr. Lanterman and agree with Mr. Jackson on this point is I would agree that you could argue that there isn't an effect, or we can't statistically prove an effect yet, but we still can't rule that out statistically either. So I believe putting that context in there is very important. And from my perspective and from my employer's perspective, I think it's very important that we put out numbers that we think are as accurate as they can, or at least put the caveats in to say these are going to be the problems in using this number as that it's an actual correct number. And I believe that's what all of these caveats are doing, and that's why I support a large number of them. Thank you.
Mr. Jordan, I'm sorry, which number is it that you were referring to in your comments that is concerning to you, that may not be accurate?
The overall cost savings number.
Oh, okay.
In previous meetings, it's been brought up several times that we don't think that that's an actual cost savings, that it's a projection. Right. Some have called it hypothetical, some haven't been that strong, but that this number isn't an actual cost savings that can be put somewhere else. And that's why I've been a big fan of these caveats that say, well, one of the reasons it's hard to measure is that we see this number that claims it's a cost savings based on the formula, but maybe the formula is flawed because the population has gone down, the costs have gone up, and we're not considering inflation, we're not considering medical costs in that number. And I guess if I didn't say that articulately enough, that's what I'm trying to get at is I believe that this number needs a lot more variables added into it so we can get to a true accurate number that says, yes, the NDOC either saved $10,000 or it didn't. And I'll just use an example next year. I expect their budget to go up by $186 million. And people say, how do you know that? Well, because I sat through IFC this week and they're going to need $186 million overhaul to the HVAC system at the High Desert State Prison. That will have nothing to do with AB 236, but that needs to be noted so that people know that that $186 million had nothing to do with that bill, but there may have been cost savings or additional costs due to AB 236 that we're unable to currently measure. And I guess all I'm really trying to say is I don't feel that this formula has done what it needed to do in getting to that true number. And I believe these caveats are important to put that out there.
All right, John McCormick.
Thank you, Chair. So I threw my thoughts in the chat for everyone on this. And it seems to me that the struggle we're having and the discussions that we're engaged in are regarding providing the report that falls within the statutory requirements that exist for it, but also reflect all of the concerns that we talk about here as members of the Sentencing Commission. So my thought was maybe we provide the report. It's a bigger or more expansive report. So you've got the part that complies with the current existing statutory requirements, but then provide a recap or something about the discussions we've been having on this committee, like Mr. Jordan just presented, that his concerns about the numbers and expanding the formula, and do some sort of recap of that. And then have the focus of the report be a request to the legislature to expand the scope of this report to allow NDSP to do a deeper dive into the data and have a report that says, you know, we have an increase in property crime, but a decrease in penalties. These are the data points we can't get that are missing. So, you know, we can at best say maybe there's a correlation. We're not really sure. So maybe it's stepping back and working on a report, and you know, of course, I say this at the 11th hour, and working on a report that is more representative of the work of the Sentencing Commission and the the sort of statutory flexibility needed by the Sentencing Commission moving forward to be able to provide data points that collectively we are more confident in.
All right. Evie Grosnick.
Thank you, Evie Grosnick, for the record. I like John McCormick's initial recommendation of and I might have gotten this incorrect, but use the original report and include the fact that the commission overall had concerns about whether or not our charge in doing this accurately is really going to give us information that's useful, right? And so I think it's also really important that we focus on our charge here today. The commission has a couple of different directives. One is, like Mr. Jackson said, to make data-driven policy recommendations. But that's not what this report is. This is the report pursuant to NRS 176.01347, where the Sentencing Commission shall develop a formula which has already been developed and voted on for purposes of this report. Doesn't mean we shouldn't look at it going forward and refine it and make it better. But for purposes of this report, it has been developed, it has been adopted. And then we are supposed to insert the numbers into that report and provide it. So that is a legislative issue, I think. If we need to change the formula, if different considerations need to go into it, I just worry that we're getting a little bit outside of the scope of what we're here to do today for this report and what this report is for. So I think John McCormick's suggestion provides a nice compromise of noting that we are following our mandate. If our mandate needs to change, that should come from the legislature. And I don't think it's harmful to include the fact that we discussed, we think there are some flaws in or some information missing. But I think when we get into the weeds of this data point versus that data point, that's where we might fall into some pitfalls.
All right. Thank you, Evie. I had a hand up as well, and I'm not sure who it is, but the name on the screen is just John. Oh,
sorry to turn
John, never saw that.
Yeah, I actually took my hand down. I agree with John McCormick's comments and that this is a legislative issue, and also with Evie's comment. And so my hand is down.
Thanks, John. Yes, Director Powers.
Thank you. I did want to just talk about here, this is the projected cost avoided report. We do have a statement of cost avoided report due on December 1st of each year. So if some of the considerations can go into that report, it's a possibility. The other thing, as we're talking about the legislature and what data points we want to use moving forward, I did discuss at the last meeting that the data points that we are statutorily required to use, this is the last report we can use those in, because there will not be the JFA 2017 numbers moving forward. So we already do have to have a discussion about what we would like to use moving forward and how we want to present that to the legislature to change that law.
Thank you. All right. And Chris, DA Hicks.
Thank you. I just wanted to make a couple quick comments on everything suggested. I think John McCormick's suggestion is a good one. I think there should be a report that highlights all these various ideas and concerns. To some degree, our minutes do that, but nobody really takes the time to go through the minutes. Except for us, of course, who are voting on them every week, but in any event, or every meeting. So I do think that's a good idea. But what I would counter some of these arguments with, and I'm with Mr. Jordan and Mr. Jackson on this, is this 640 million number was a speculative number. To the extent that Dr. Lannerman has laid out all the detail that we should do deep dives into this data, which I totally agree with her, that wasn't done. Back in the day, this projected number came out, and it seems that we are not avoiding all those costs as it was once said we would. And so I believe to bolster how we're going to address these things moving forward, and to just point out to those that read this report, because let's face it, this is what's going to be relied on, is this particular report that's statutorily required. It is important that the varying views of the commission is highlighted in there. And that's my final point, is this is framed, what we're talking about, as merely considerations. This is something for all to consider. We are not drawing exact conclusions from one instance to AB 236, but what we are highlighting is considerations, caveats, if you will, or disclaimers, that these are concerns that different members of the commission have that need to be considered and that should be looked at as we move forward, as Georgia just said. So I think it's a stretch to say, oh, this directly draws false allegations towards AB 236, or there are so many variables that we're not considering. That all may be true. But as this is framed in the report, these are considerations by the committee members. We all have diverse backgrounds. We all have differing views. But these are areas that need to be concerned. And most importantly, as to Mr. Jackson's suggestions, this is actual data. This is actual data that we have that we can put out there. If the chair will allow me, I'd like to make a motion at this time, if that's okay, Chair Herndon.
Well, let me finish with everybody's comments. I had a couple that I was going to make as well, Chris, if that's okay.
My apologies.
That's okay.
So in conclusion, I'm supportive of the suggestions, and as I said, it's not an absolute directive that's being given by this commission. These are merely considerations that, by all counts, should be considered. Versus none of that's out there, and as Mr. Jordan said, it can get political, and all of a sudden, what you're going to be hearing at the legislature is $640 million was avoided, and that is, I frankly believe, is a not telling the entire story. So thank you.
Thank you. Well, let me ask. John Arascata, do you have your hand up again?
I do. Maybe what we're really talking about here, and we all acknowledge when this commission was first formed, we started at 0. So the only data we had was from the CFJ report. That was our working framework. Perhaps the recommendation to the legislature should be consider commissioning a new report based on the data that's been developed to this point that could give us an expanded, or Judge Herndon, as you mentioned, an expanded look at things, or can hone down on what our statutory duty is with the Department of Corrections only. But perhaps suggesting that now that we have, I think it's 5 years of information and data, that an updated report should be considered to be commissioned by the legislature.
Let me ask, thank you, John. Let me ask Director Powers, because I don't disagree with the idea, John McCormick, that you raised, and that I think some of the people that have spoken since have kind of dovetailed into somewhat. But would that be more appropriate for the statement, Georgia, than for this report, which to me is more of this is a kind of a potential numbers report?
Yes, I do believe that would be something we should consider, that I can write up and we'll start talking about in the upcoming months for the December report, for the statement of costs avoided, to again change things during the next legislative session. This is the projected report that uses the data points that were asked for in statute. And so, yes.
Okay. And so that might be a more appropriate time to, for instance, make recommendations, as John Ariscott had just mentioned about, hey, we might need some changes so that we can do our job better moving forward, as well as maybe a more appropriate time to reflect a number of the discussion topics and various concerns that people have about how we're kind of calculating things, what they actually represent, what deeper data points might mean to the overall numbers. Yeah.
If you're speaking to me, yes,
Yes.
Chair, I do believe that. I also want to add here, and I know that we do talk about the 640 million in the beginning, but just as this is how this started, our projection of costs avoided, even though it does use those projected prison population numbers, are only inmate-driven costs. So it's approximately an average of 13% of their budget. It is not the whole budget. So I just wanted to point that out.
Thank you. So the other thing I would say is understanding what this is versus what the statement is. I agree, and I don't know actually that I think after listening to everybody, there should really be a lot of disagreement about a couple of things. I agree that our considerations are just things that we're telling as part of this report so that somebody that has the report and is looking at the numbers can put some understanding of a couple of things in there. Pursuant to 176.01347, we are to use the 2018 prison population and the actual prison population now as part of our calculation of costs. Mark's data point number 2 that just says, here's the population in 2018 and here's the population now, to me is very necessary. That's kind of part of what we're supposed to be using. So we give the report, we tell people what the population was. And the other data point that I would want to know receiving this is, what is the prison's budget? Again, I would think 2018 and now would be important. Beyond those, I agree that we shouldn't really be arguing or pointing out any particular examples because we don't have other examples. So for instance, when we talk about costs, yes, I think there could be an increase in costs dramatically based on health issues with inmates, based on what Mr. Jordan said about, hey, we're going to need to increase the budget because we have HVAC remediation to do in the prison system. So without really going into everything, we can't go into anything. But I think we should have as part of this report telling people, here's the population, here's the budget. Now, legislature, if you want to take this and dig down further and kind of figure out what these numbers mean and what, if anything, you should do or not do, then the legislature is in a much better position to do that, and much more appropriately positioned to do that than I think we are. The data point number 4 on societal costs kind of delves a little bit into more of an argument about what is or isn't really in there. And to me, that's more of a thing that we could include in the statement at the end of the year, as opposed to just the number thing. And then in the first data point, I don't really have any problem with encumbered or available. I don't have a problem with tangible or measurable. But thereafter, where it says, but represents future savings, I would just say represents potential future savings and end it there, because I think that last part of what Mark added is a little more of argument about, what it really means with the 2017 JFA. But point being, putting some numbers in there and the considerations, to me, isn't really argument about anything. And it's not the time to delve into what every one of those numbers means. It's to give them to somebody that's getting the report about a number. So that's all I had to say. So let me go back to Chris, who wanted to make a motion or an amendment. I'm not sure. Chris, why don't you go ahead?
Chair, I think Ms. Murray has a comment.
Oh, I'm sorry. Julia, I didn't see your hand.
That's okay. Julia Murray for the record.
There you go.
I just wanted to super briefly respond to what you actually just raised, Chair Herndon. Okay. I fully take no issue with the statement of a fact. The population was X. The population is X. The issue, and I'll specifically go to item number 3, The issue comes in with the second sentence. You have a fact.
Oh yeah, let me interrupt you. If we, and I apologize, if we get to the point of voting on each of these, I would take out the second sentences in both of those 2 points.
Okay, then I think we're on the same page.
Okay.
So I'll let it go. Because I think when we're evaluating the facts, we're exceeding the scope here. And that's really all I wanted to get to.
Okay. All right, Chris.
Thank you. So I would make a motion that the commission adopt bullet points 1, 2, and 3 made by District Attorney Mark Jackson. But I would make as a part of my motion that the ending of bullet point 1, where after the comment it says but represents future saving or future projections based on hypothetical numbers adopted by JFA in their 2017 projections, to read rather but represents future savings, period. As Chair Herndon just pointed out. Additionally, as to bullet point number 3, I would recommend that we eliminate the second sentence as a part of our adoption of bullet points 1, 2, and 3 recommended by DA Jackson. I hope that is clear for everybody. It is based on the recommendations just made by the chair and all the considerations of the committee members. So I can clarify if necessary.
So let me
adoption.
Let me just ask Mark or Chris to make sure. So you're moving to adopt item number 1 with the words tangible or measurable, or the words encumbered or available that Georgia originally used?
I was moving to adopt it with tangible or measurable funds.
Okay.
But represents future savings, as was originally in there, and eliminating the remainder after savings.
All right. And were you inserting the word potential before future savings that I was discussing, or leaving that out?
I'm sorry, yes, potential.
Okay. And then on number 2, eliminate the second sentence on that one, or is your proposal, your motion, to leave that second sentence in on that one?
My proposal was to leave that in,
okay,
but take out the second sentence as Ms. Murray just raised in suggestion number 3.
Okay, so let's do this. Let's break it down with each one. So let's start with, we have a motion to approve bullet point number 1 that we just discussed, that would say there are difficulties in calculating avoided costs as it does not designate tangible or measurable funds, but represents potential future savings. Do we have a second to adopt 1 with that language?
I'll second that, Michelle Bates, for the record.
Thank you. All right.
Chair Herndon, Mark Jackson,
yes.
To speed some of it up on number 4, I will withdraw my 4th one.
Okay.
And bring that back when we prior to our December meeting. And I would ask the executive director to just include that
okay,
as one of the recommendations for that December one. So
perfect.
Thank you. Just focus on 1, 2, and 3.
Okay. All right, Georgia, since I'm guessing we're not going to get unanimity on some of these, or maybe I'm wrong, who knows? I'm trying to figure out the best way to actually do a vote on this, whether it's just to say, hey, raise your hands and say aye, or whether to do it by a roll call vote. My sense is probably better to do them by roll call votes, but I'm going to defer to you.
That was what I had planned.
Okay.
Let's see how they start to go, and then we'll do the first one.
Okay, all right.
All right. So I did redline it here. You can see my screen for number 1, that's what we're voting on.
I believe we have one error in the correction you made there.
Okay, let me know.
But it says, but represents potential future savings.
Oh, there you go.
There we go. Thank you. All right.
let's go ahead and do a roll call on that as it appears on the screen.
John Arascata,
Yes.
Michelle Bays,
Yes.
Suzanne Crawford,
Yes.
Christopher DeRico,
Yes.
Aaron Evans,
Yes.
Evelyn Grosnick,
Yes.
Chris Hicks,
Yes.
Mark Jackson,
Yes.
Troy Jordan,
Yes.
Jennifer Lanterman,
Yes.
Joshua Martinez,
Josh, what happened?
All right, I don't know what I did. Sorry about that. Yes,
Thank you.
sorry.
Okay.
John McCormick,
Yes.
Julia Murray,
Yes.
Erica Susayamas,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Considine,
Yes.
Assemblyman Hibbets,
Yes.
Senator Scheibel,
No.
Senator Krasner,
Yes.
Vice Chair Brady,
Yes.
Chair Herndon.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay. Got one. Perfect. All right. So let's jump number 2 because there may be concerns about the second sentence in number 2. And we're going to go to number 3 that references the budget, but deleted that second sentence. So it just says the NDOC budget for fiscal year 2018 was that number. The NDOC budget for FY 2025 has a number, period. So the motion is to just approve that sentence of that bullet point. And it now appears on your screen that way as well. All right, Georgia, let's go ahead and do a roll call on that one.
Okay. John Arascata,
No.
Michelle Bays,
Yes.
Suzanne Crawford,
Yes.
Christopher DeRico,
Yes.
Aaron Evans,
Yes.
Evelyn Grosnick,
No.
Christopher Hicks,
Yes.
Mark Jackson,
Yes.
Troy Jordan,
Yes.
Jennifer Lanterman,
Yes.
Josh Martinez,
Yes.
John McCormick,
No.
Julia Murray,
No.
Erica Susayamas,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Considine,
No.
Assemblyman Hibbets,
Yes.
Senator Scheibel,
No.
Senator Krasner,
Yes.
Vice Chair Brady,
No, only because I'm not sure those are the actual budget numbers.
Chair Herndon.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay, we'll go to bullet point number 2. The motion standing is to approve it as it's listed in your original consideration that came out with the second sentence.
Okay.
Chair Hernan, can I amend my motion?
Sure.
I would, as to the second recommendation, I would move that we adopt it, but we omit the second sentence of this is a 20.95% decrease in the inmate population.
All right. I appreciate that. And Ms. Bays, I think you seconded the original motion. Do you accept that amendment?
Yes. Thank you, sir.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay. With that amendment, then it now appears on your screen as just the first sentence of the proposed bullet point listing the NDOC population in 2018 and as of July 1st of this year. So Georgia, if you'll go ahead and call roll on that one.
John Arascata,
Yes.
Michelle Bays,
Yes.
Suzanne Crawford,
Yes.
Chris DeRico,
Yes.
Aaron Evans,
Yes.
Evelyn Grosnick,
No.
Christopher Hicks,
Yes.
Mark Jackson,
Yes.
Troy Jordan,
Yes.
Jennifer Lanterman,
Yes.
Josh Martinez,
Yes.
John McCormick,
Yes.
Julia Murray,
Yes.
Erica Suzuyamas,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Considine,
Yes.
Assemblyman Hibbets,
Yes.
Senator Scheibel,
Yes.
Senator Krasner,
Yes.
Vice Chair Brady,
Yes.
Chair Herndon.
Yes.
Motion passes.
All right. And then we will note for the record that Mark has withdrawn his request on bullet point number 4. And that can be renewed later on in the year when we start addressing what's going to go into our statement that'll be prepared in advance of the December 1st deadline. So let me move to.
Chair, I have a point of order.
Sure.
I just want to clarify, when we voted on number 1, that the anecdote that reflects data shows the population slow and steady decrease, that was not part of the motion and that was struck. Is that accurate?
That was a separate data point, I believe, that Georgia included in her original proposal, right, Georgia?
The 29%?
No, in between bullet points 1 and 2 with Mark's proposed changes, there's a bullet point that says data shows the NDOC population began a slow but steady decrease in 2017.
That was part of the original report.
Right. So that was not part of the motion, Mark, or John, excuse me.
Okay, understood.
All right. So let me move back to Assemblywoman Considine. My sense is, having just approved the bare facts of bullet points 2 and 3, that that would have covered your concern about why you were proposing that we do something in what you listed as 5, 6, and 7. But please correct me if I'm wrong.
That is correct. If we can move 5, 6, or 7 to the discussion that we'll have for the statement of cost avoided report for December,
Okay.
that would be better.
Great. Okay. So we'll note that for the record as well. And then we'll move to, we have bullet points 8, 9, 10, and 11 on page 5 of the report, where there were some suggested changes, Mark, in terms of where we say specifically the commission recommends. So bullet point number 8 simply inserts the word sentencing before commission, and then includes the words the following after recommends. Just by kind of a hand and aye or nay vote, does anybody want to make a motion on bullet point number 8 first?
I'll keep moving forward with my motions, Chair. Thank you. I'll move to adopt bullet 8.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
Second.
I didn't. Oh, John McCormick. Thank you. Okay. All those in favor of the words included in bullet point 8, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anybody opposed? No. Okay. So that's approved as well, Georgia. And then bullet point number 9. Proposes a change rather than saying continuing to fund $3 million to the Nevada Local Justice Reinvestment Coordinating Council. It makes a change to say continuing financial support of not less than $3 million. So it leaves open the possibility of proposing more funding to that coordinating council. Go ahead.
Sorry, Chair. This is John McCormick. I'm going to move we approve the change in bullet number 9.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
This is Vice Chair Brady. I second that motion.
Thank you. And I should have done this with 8, but is there any discussion on bullet point 9 before we take a vote? Don't hear any. All right, thank you. All right, all those in favor of the change proposed in bullet point 9, say aye.
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 Anyone opposed? All right, that passes as well. Thank you. Bullet point number 10 proposes a change to the language that said, also a significant amount of the remaining costs avoided should be invested in efforts to increase transitional housing opportunities for justice-involved individuals. The change would be to say continued financial support utilizing actual cost savings, if any, to increase transitional housing opportunities for justice-involved individuals.
Chair Herndon, this is
Yeah.
Mark Jackson.
Yeah, I was going to ask you. Go ahead.
I want to remove the based upon the previous discussion, remove the actual cost savings portion of that.
Okay.
And just be, I guess, continued financial support to increase transactional. So remove actual cost savings, comma, if any, comma. So and the reason I did that is I didn't know, and this came up at the previous discussion, the way that it read is that also a significant amount of the remaining costs avoided should be invested in efforts. So I don't necessarily want to just tie it to that. I think all of these three of these are very important. And that's why I recommended the previous change. And I want to try to capture that here also.
So am I correct then that your change in bullet point number 10 is really about the idea of including the word significant?
Excluding the word significant. I don't.
Right. And your concern is concern is with including that word about, what we should do with a significant amount, as opposed to just reflecting we should be looking at continued financial support for this rather than restricting it to the significant amount.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Do we have a motion to approve the bullet point number 10 as modified by BA Jackson?
So moved, Chris Six.
Okay. Do we have a second?
Second.
Senator Krasner, thank you. All right. Any discussion on bullet point number 10?
Can I make sure that what's on the screen is what DA Jackson had in mind?
Let's see. Continued financial support to increase transitional housing opportunities for justice-involved individuals. So yes, it would be Sentencing Commission recommends the following. Bullet point, continued financial support to increase transitional housing opportunities for justice-involved individuals. Okay. Anybody else have any comments?
Vice Chair Brady, for the record.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair Justice Herndon. Can we just remove the word continued? It makes it sound like we're doing so much for transitional housing for justice-involved individuals. We're doing some things, but can we just have financial support utilized, and then the rest? I don't know. Having the word continued in there to me implies that we're doing a whole bunch. That's my comment. Thank you.
Yeah, perhaps take out continue and put increased financial support to transitional housing opportunities for justice involved. So move the increase to the beginning, replacing continue.
This is Mark Jackson. I like what John Arascata. I think that best captures what I was trying to do.
Okay. So, Chris, will you accept that amendment in your motion? So it would say increase financial support?
Yes, I accept that amendment and move that we adopt it as it is on the screen.
All right. And Senator Krasner, would you accept that as your second to that motion?
Yes, I second the motion.
Thank you. Any further comment from anyone about bullet point number 10 now being increased financial support to increase transitional housing opportunities?
This is Mark Jackson. I think when John Arascata said that, he removed the second increase.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry, John. Was that correct?
Yeah. That's accurate.
Increased financial support to transitional housing opportunities. Okay. I'm sorry. Okay. All those in favor of adopting bullet point 10 as... I'm sorry? Okay, all those in favor of adopting bullet point 10 as proposed by Mr. Jackson with the amendments from himself and then Mr. Arascata. please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, that passes as well. And then bullet point number 11, Mark, is there anything you wanted to say about that before I ask for a motion?
Yes, I'm not saying that this is more important than any of them, but I put a high level of importance on this. So actually, if we can remove the after financial support, that comma, in an amount to be determined. Just
okay.
In an amount to be determined. But I'm hoping that everyone would be on board about. I really hope that our legislature will take heed of this recommendation and support some funding for the respective data systems for both the Department of Corrections and PNP.
Okay. Yeah, I thought the part that said the commission continues to recommend was somewhat duplicitous from what we were saying up top, which is the commission recommends. So, all right, that would be as amended on our screen. It would be financial support for the Department of Corrections and the Division of Parole and Probation, and then on. Do we have a motion to approve that bullet point number 11 as proposed by DA Jackson, excuse me, with the amendment he just made?
Michelle Bays, for the record, I make that motion.
Thank you.
I'll second it, Chris Hicks.
Thank you. Any discussion or comments about the current motion?
Sorry, Senator Seipel butting in here, and I
Okay.
don't mean to be nitpicky, but I mean, the point of this report is to discuss cost savings. So when we reinvest the saved costs from bullet points 10 and 11, then we just kind of have some general recommendations from the Sentencing Commission that would be appropriately placed in another report or BDR or other recommendation to the legislature.
So I'm sorry, Senator, you want to leave some language in 10 or 11 that reflects the cost avoided savings?
In both of them, I think that the purpose of having these recommendations in this report, as opposed to a different report, is to specifically outline that we are utilizing the cost savings or the costs avoided to reinvest in transitional housing and technology upgrades. If you take out the clause about investing a portion of the costs avoided, then it just becomes a general recommendation to the legislature.
Okay. All right. Anybody else have any comments about that?
This is Chris Hicks. I see what Senator Scheibel's saying and certainly respect that. But I think that the title of the report, Projected Cost Avoided, and the tenor throughout still maintains that is why we're suggesting this. It's just not as overt as it was before. So we've already passed 10. So that's my 2 cents. I certainly appreciate what she's saying, but I don't think it's fatal to the recommendations.
Well, let me ask this, if this might kind of address what you're getting at, Senator Scheibel. What about if we made, up at bullet point number 8, if we made a further modification to say specifically the Sentencing Commission recommends the utilization of cost avoided savings for, and then we have our below bullet points.
I think that would work.
Because then it would cover all 3 of them.
Chair, this is John McCormick. If you want a motion on including that, I will make one.
Thank you. So let's hop off actually, let's finish up knowing that no, I guess we should hop off 11. Let's go back up to 8. And yes, thank you, John, for making the motion. Do we have a second on making the motion to change that first sentence to be specifically the Sentencing Commission recommends the utilization of costs avoided for the following?
I can second Assemblywoman Considine.
Thank you. All right, any discussion on that motion?
I have a question. Tara.
Sure.
This is Julia Murray for the record. I have a question for the Department of Sentencing Policy. Georgia, in regards to number 9, the current $3 million that was invested in the commission that's being overseen by the coordinating council, was that money that came out of quote unquote costs avoided, or was that a direct allotment of funds that were awarded to the commission? Because I think that that money that we talk about in item now numbered 1 under these bullet points is incredibly important and incredibly important to the work of this commission. And I don't want to see that cut out by someone coming into the next session saying, well, we don't have a tangible and measurable cost avoided before us on this session, and thus we are not allotting you any money into the coordinating council for grants that further the goals of this commission. So could you just clarify that for us before we vote on these words?
It was an individual appropriation. We talked about it and did not get the money with the cost avoided recommendations. And so we got an appropriation through a bill from Assemblyman Yeager.
May I ask a follow-up, Chair?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very good point, Julia.
Does the language that we are currently about to vote on, adding into that first sentence, cause you any concerns with the ability to have continued and or increased funding to bullet point number 1?
Well, I would love to say no, but proactively, maybe we should modify the proposal we're going to vote on further to say the utilization of costs avoided. I think I should have savings in there as well, Georgia, but the utilization of cost avoided savings where applicable. I mean, I don't obviously want to limit somehow the coordinating council funding being eliminated, right? By somebody saying, well, that was only supposed to be utilized of cost avoided savings as opposed to a separate grant. Or we can just scrap what we're talking about in the modification of that first sentence and go back to Senator Scheibel's concerns about having it added into where the proposed 10 and 11 are.
So I'll just jump in here since I'm the one who opened this can of worms. I agree. I thought maybe the person who made the motion to return to point 8 will withdraw that motion. And I mean, to be frank, we can vote on 10 and 11 as they are. I guess what I was trying to say is I just don't see the point of removing the word. What we're doing in 11 is just removing the word actual, or, what is it? Portion of cost avoided. We're just removing the term portions of cost avoided from a report about cost avoided. I don't see the point in doing that, but the commission's going to vote on it. So let's just go ahead.
Okay, so let's do this. John, will you withdraw your motion on the first sentence?
So withdrawn, Chair.
Thank you. All right. And 10, actually, we voted on it approved already. So we would have to go back to that. But it sounds like Senator Scheibel, you're saying you're okay with that as it is.
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Okay. So on 11, Mark, what about if we modify that to say financial support from a portion of the costs avoided for the Department of Corrections, the Division of Parole and Probation, et cetera?
Chair, this is not to cut Mr. Jackson off, but it's John McCormick. We could say financial support from costs avoided or any other source the legislature deems appropriate. I mean,
well, but that's kind of getting outside of what our cost avoided job is here, I think.
Okay. Yeah, no.
I mean, I agree with you, but I think it's probably better to cabin this to just what we're talking about.
Chair Herndon, this is Mark Jackson. I support your recommendation.
Okay, thank you. So Georgia, I think it would be financial support from a portion of the costs avoided be given to the Department of Corrections and the Division of Parole and Probation. Okay. All right. Do we have a motion to approve what's on your screen as bullet point number 11 or proposal number 11?
So moved, Vice Chair Brady here.
Thank you. Second?
Michelle Bates for the record, I'll second it.
Thank you. All right. All those in favor of approving what's on the screen as proposal 11, say aye.
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 Anyone opposed? No. Okay. So that one is approved as well, which I think finishes your report for you, right, Director Powers?
Yes, I believe so. I just want to make sure 8 is going to pass as it was originally voted upon.
Yes. Yes, we went through that one.
All right.
And I probably should have started out by saying you did a terrific job on producing the report, despite our peeves and peccadillos and our little changes and whatnot, which are all come from a place of good concern and good thought. I really appreciate you putting all this together for us. You did a terrific job, so thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, and do we have anything further on that? I think that completes that agenda item, since we've got the report now in a shape to be approved and filed.
Chair Herndon, this is Mark Jackson. I think we do have
Sure.
to have a motion to approve the report now as amended.
Oh, as overall, yes, you're right. I'm sorry. I kind of flew right past that. Okay, will anybody make a motion to approve the entire report as amended today?
Mark Jackson, so moved.
Thank you. A second?
I'll second.
I'm sorry, who was that?
Senator Krasner.
Oh, thank you. Okay, let's do a roll call vote if we could, please, Georgia.
John Ariscotta,
Yes.
Michelle Bates,
Yes.
Suzanne Crawford,
Yes.
Christopher DeRico,
Yes.
Aaron Evans,
Yes.
Evelyn Grosnick,
Yes.
Christopher Hicks,
Yes.
Mark Jackson,
Yes.
Troy Jordan,
Yes.
Jennifer Lanterman,
Yes.
Joshua Martinez,
Yes.
John McCormick,
Yes.
Julia Murray,
Yes.
Erica Sibiamas,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Considine,
Yes.
Assemblyman Hibbets,
Yes.
Senator Scheibel,
Yes.
Senator Krasner,
Yes.
Vice Chair Brady,
Yes.
Chair Herndon.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay, now we've got it all done for you, Georgia. Thank you again. And thank you, Mark. I kind of blew right past that. Okay, that's going to close out agenda item number 5. Which I think is going to get us back to our future meetings discussion, which is agenda item number 6. We don't have a date on our September meeting right now, do we?
We do not. There have been a couple hiccups,
Okay.
but we do plan to have one, and it should be on the books by next week.
Okay. So we'll go ahead and leave that for right now. We can email the commission members and let them know the date that we're looking at, and have a discussion about that as necessary. And then we have our November date set for November 1st, yes? Okay. And then what date, is it the November 1st date by which we need to approve the statement?
Yes.
Okay. And so do you have some guesstimate idea of when you think you're going to get a rough kind of draft out to everybody on that?
That will be at the September meeting,
Okay.
because we can't look at it as a group without public involved.
Got it. Okay. So let's just kind of, to everybody's point about things they might want to include in the statement, ideas that they have, things that tailor into what Mark was saying today, things that tailor into what Dr. Landerman was saying today. I'm just going to encourage everybody to kind of start putting together some ideas with some brevity in mind. Obviously, we don't want we don't want to include things with the statement that kind of bogs itself down a little bit. It should be just kind of discussion points type things that we're including in there. But I would go ahead and start getting those prepared in your own mind so that once we get the September meeting in place and we get together in September and we start discussing the statement that's been provided, we'll be able to have some intelligent conversation about those as well so that we can meet our deadline without any difficulties. Okay, anybody else have anything about future meetings? All right, we'll close agenda item number 6, and we're going to move Jose to agenda item 7, which is public comment again. Do we have any folks online that wish to make public comment?
We have no callers, Chair.
Okay, thank you. So we'll go ahead and close agenda item number 7, public comment. And with that, we will adjourn our meeting for today. I appreciate everybody's time. Look, I actually expected this to take a lot longer than it did to work through all of those things. But I appreciate everybody's comments and their concerns and their getting prepared ahead of time so that we can have a good, robust discussion about this and get it to a point of getting it approved for the director. So with that, we'll go ahead and adjourn our meeting, and I will see everybody again in September. So thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.